A gang tied up a starving canine German shepherd and left him to die. What the elderly man did next will touch your heart. He was once a hero, a loyal canine German shepherd who served with courage, chasing down criminals and protecting lives without hesitation. But when his mission ended, so did his worth in the eyes of the wrong people. Beaten, starved, left tied to a rusted chain in an abandoned junkyard by a ruthless gang. No one was supposed to find him. No one was supposed to care, but someone did. An elderly man, forgotten by most and walking with the weight of his own past, stumbled across a shadow in the dirt. He didn't expect to see those eyes, haunted, fading, but still burning with something no one had managed to break. What happened next wasn't just a rescue. It was a moment that would change both of their lives forever. Before we dive into this emotional story of survival, second chances, and the powerful bond between a broken man and a forgotten dog, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. These stories deserve to be heard, and your support helps us share more moments of hope like this one. Now get ready, because what you're about to see will stay with you long after the screen fades to black. The wind howled through the wreckage of the old junkyard on the edge of town. Rusted cars sat like skeletons beneath gray clouds. Their windows cracked, paint faded, and silence thick in the air. No one came here. Not anymore. It was the kind of place people avoided, a graveyard of metal and bad memories. But in the farthest corner of that forgotten place, hidden beneath a sheet of warped metal and overgrown weeds, lay something still breathing, barely. The K9 German shepherd's ribs jutted out from his frail frame. His fur was matted with mud, blood, and the sharp sting of neglect. His once powerful legs trembled every time he tried to move. A thick chain wrapped around his neck and looped tightly to a rusted pole. He chewed at it until his gums bled, until his teeth cracked, and now he had stopped trying. His name, though no one had said it in months, was Shadow. Once, Shadow had been the pride of the force, a legend in his unit. He could sniff out a weapon in seconds, chase down a suspect through back alleys at lightning speed, and stand like a silent warrior at his handler's side. But then came the ambush. A gang raid gone wrong. Gunfire, smoke, screams. Shadow had lunged to protect his partner. Taking the bullet meant for the man he trusted more than life itself. He survived, but barely. His handler didn't. And after that, everything changed. No badge, no home. Passed from kennel to kennel. Eventually stolen by a gang that saw him not as a hero, but as a tool, a threat they couldn't control. So they chained him up in the middle of nowhere and left him to disappear. No food, no water, no goodbye. Just dirt and silence. Until that morning, when the sound of slow footsteps crunched across the gravel. Not hurried, not afraid. A cane tap with each step, steady and deliberate. Then a soft voice broke the silence. "Hello, anyone here?" Shadow didn't move. He couldn't. The voice grew closer. The cane tapped again, then a pause. "Dear God," the voice whispered. The old man stepped through the weeds, leaning heavily on his cane. His gray beard blew gently in the wind, his flannel jacket patched at the elbows. His name was Walter Briggs, 73 years old, a widower, a retired mechanic, and lately just another old man the world had forgotten. But Walter's eyes didn't miss much. He dropped to one knee beside the dog. "What did they do to you?" he asked. Shadow opened one eye, just barely. Walter pulled a small thermos from his coat pocket and poured water into the lid, sliding it forward. Shadow didn't move. "Come on, boy, just a sip." It took everything the dog had to lift his head, but he did. He sniffed, then slowly lapped at the water. One sip, then two. Then his body collapsed again. Walter's heart clenched. "You're not dying here. Not on my watch." He reached for the chain. It was thick, locked, but rusted. With a grunt, he rose to his feet and shuffled back to his truck parked near the fence. Minutes later, he returned with bolt cutters, old and heavy, but sharp enough. He worked in silence, jaw clenched, until the chain snapped loose with metallic crack. Shadow didn't flinch. Walter slipped off his flannel jacket and wrapped it gently around the dog. "Let's get you out of here." It took nearly 10 minutes to lift the shepherd into the truck bed. Walter cushioned him with an old blanket, then climbed into the driver's seat. His hand shook as the truck pulled away from the junkyard, dust trailing behind it like a ghost. Shadow's eyes opened again just for a second, and for the first time in a long time, he felt something stir deep inside. Hope. Walter lived in a small house on the edge of town, a modest place with creaky floors, yellowing curtains, and the faint scent of old books and machine oil. It had been quiet since his wife passed. Too quiet, the kind of quiet that lingered in your chest and made mornings feel heavy. But now that silence was broken by something new, a presence. He carried the weak shepherd into the house, cradling him like something sacred. Shadow was barely conscious, his breathing shallow but steady. Walter laid him gently on a folded quilt by the fireplace and rushed to grab a bowl of warm broth. "You don't need to trust me," Walter whispered, kneeling beside him. "But you're safe now." Shadow lifted his head just enough to drink. His eyes scanned the room. Every sound, every shadow, still put him on edge. He was trained to detect danger, to protect, but now he had nothing left to defend. Only the echo of instincts and the ache of betrayal. Walter spent the rest of the day tending to him, gently cleaning the wounds, applying ointment to the cuts, whispering words of encouragement that felt strange coming from a mouth so used to silence. The dog never growled, never barked. He just watched. The next morning, Walter woke up before sunrise. He shuffled into the living room with his usual limp, half expecting to find the dog gone. But there he was, still curled on the quilt, still breathing, still here. "Good morning, soldier," Walter said softly, setting down a small bowl of softened kibble. "You slept better than I did." Shadow didn't move at first. Then, slowly and painfully, he pushed himself up just enough to eat. His body shook with the effort, but Walter smiled, like he'd just won the lottery. "That's it. That's what I like to see." Over the next few days, Shadow gained a little more strength. He began walking short distances around the living room. His steps were stiff, his muscles weak, but he moved. And each time he looked at Walter, something in his eyes changed, recognition. One afternoon, as Walter sat on the porch with a book in hand, Shadow limped over and laid his head gently on the man's knee. Walter froze, then slowly placed a wrinkled hand on the dog's head. "You miss someone too, huh?" They stayed like that for a long time. But peace doesn't last forever. That evening, a truck pulled up outside. Loud engine, aggressive presence. Walter stood up, instantly on edge. A man stepped out, young, hard eyes, tattoos running down his neck. Two others stayed in the truck. Walter knew trouble when he saw it. "Can I help you?" he asked. "We're looking for a dog," the man said. "German shepherd. Might have wandered off." Walter didn't blink. "Don't have one. Your neighbor said they saw you carrying one in here a few nights ago." Shadow stood just behind the screen door, body tense, ears perked. Walter crossed his arms. "That dog doesn't belong to you." The man smirked. "You sure about that, old man?" Shadow growled, low and deep, the kind of sound that promised violence. Walter stepped forward. "You better leave." "Or what?" Walter didn't flinch. "Or you'll see what happens when someone's got nothing left to lose." The men in the truck laughed, but they didn't step closer. After a long, cold stare, the man backed off. "Ain't over, old man." They drove off, tires screeching, dust clouding the sunset. Walter turned back to Shadow. "You were right not to trust people," he whispered. "But I won't let them hurt you again." And for the first time since he'd been abandoned, Shadow let out a quiet whine and leaned into Walter's leg. Not as a soldier, not as a weapon, but as a soul slowly learning how to heal. The morning sun spilled through the dusty window panes of Walter's living room, casting a golden glow over the sleeping figure by the fireplace. Shadow was still curled tightly on the quilt, breathing more evenly now, though his ribs still showed with every rise and fall of his chest. Walter stood nearby, watching with a quiet tenderness that he hadn't felt in years. It had been a long time since something or someone had made his house feel alive again. He shuffled into the kitchen, set the kettle on the stove, and opened a small tin of old dog biscuits he found buried in the pantry. He didn't know if they were still good, but Shadow didn't seem to care. The dog devoured them like he was still afraid it might be his last meal. "You and I," Walter said, lowering himself onto the armchair with a grunt. "We're not so different." Shadow looked up, licking the crumbs from his snout. Walter rubbed his sore knees and stared into the fire. I lost someone too. My boy Jacob served overseas, Army medic. Bright, brave. He was 28 when the letter came. His voice faltered. Shadow tilted his head. I kept this house just the way it was. His room's still upstairs. His boots are still by the door. People tell you to move on. Walter shook his head. But some things, some pain, you just learn to live with. He looked at Shadow. I think you know something about that. Shadow's ears twitched. There was something profound about the way the dog listened, like he understood not just the words, but the ache inside them. Later that day, Walter and Shadow went outside together. The sun was warmer than it had been all week. Shadow walked slowly, but his steps were more confident now. He sniffed the breeze, lifted his head, and for the first time his tail moved. Not fully, not fast, but it moved. Walter noticed. That's what I like to see. They walked the length of the yard together, side by side, like two veterans trying to remember how to be part of the world again. Walter's cane tapped the ground with each step. Shadow limped, but followed close until he stopped suddenly. His body froze, his ears locked in one direction. A soft growl rumbled deep in his chest. Walter turned. At the end of the road, just beyond the trees, a truck had parked again. The same one. The gang hadn't given up. Walter narrowed his eyes, but the truck drove off after a few seconds, as if it was just watching, waiting. That night, Walter locked every door, every window. He placed a shotgun by the bed, not because he was afraid, but because he refused to be helpless. Shadow lay beside him on the floor, tense, alert, his body a coiled spring of muscle and instinct. You're not going back to them, Walter said softly. Not as long as I'm breathing. Shadow didn't sleep. Not much. But at one point in the deep of the night, he lifted his head and placed it gently on Walter's slippered foot. Just for a moment, a silent promise. The next morning, Walter called someone he hadn't spoken to in over a decade, Sheriff Melline Grant, a former friend of his son's. Tough, smart, and not afraid to make noise when justice was needed. You remember me? Walter asked over the phone. Of course I do, she said. Jacob's father. I need a favor, and I need you to believe me. He explained everything. The junkyard, the gang, the dog, Shadow. There was a pause on the line. I'll be there by tomorrow morning. Don't do anything stupid until then. Walter chuckled. No promises. As he hung up, Shadow looked up at him. Walter gave him a half smile. Help's on the way, partner. And for the first time since they'd met, it didn't feel like one of them was saving the other. It felt like they were saving each other. Sheriff Melline Grant's cruiser pulled into Walter's driveway just after sunrise. The gravel crunched under her tires as she parked next to his old pickup. She stepped out, boots hitting the ground with authority, her hand instinctively brushing the badge on her belt. Gray hair tied back, eyes sharp as ever. She hadn't changed much since the funeral 10 years ago. Walter was already waiting on the porch, a mug of black coffee in one hand and Shadow sitting faithfully at his feet. So this is the infamous dog, she said, climbing the steps. Walter nodded. Shadow. Melline crouched slightly, keeping her distance but studying the shepherd with practiced eyes. He's been through hell. So have I, Walter replied quietly. She looked at Walter. You weren't exaggerating. He looks like a soldier in recovery. He is. She stood. You said the gang came back twice. Walter, they didn't do anything, just watched. That's intimidation. Classic move. She looked around the property. They're trying to figure out how far they can push you. Well, they'll learn real quick, Walter said, setting down his coffee. I don't scare easy. Melline smirked. That's why I came. You and that dog are officially under my protection now. I already pulled his microchip data. Shadow was registered under the County K-9 Unit 6 years ago. Decorated, deployed, retired after injury. Walter raised an eyebrow. So he was someone? Melline smiled. He still is. And if the people who dumped him show their face again, they won't walk away with a warning. Inside the house, Shadow lay quietly near the fireplace as Melline scanned a report from her laptop. This dog has done more for this town than half the men who walk free in it, she muttered. The system failed him. It failed my son, too, Walter said. There was a long silence. Meline reached across the table, resting her hand gently over Walter's. Jacob will be proud of what you're doing. Walter nodded, swallowing back emotion. I just saw something in this dog, something broken, and I knew what that felt like. That night, Walter couldn't sleep again. Neither could Shadow. The gang would come back. He could feel it in his bones. Around midnight, Shadow stood abruptly and growled low, guttural. Walter sat up in his recliner, shotgun already in hand. He didn't need to ask what Shadow had heard. He trusted him now like a partner. They both moved to the window. A black SUV idled at the edge of the property. No lights, no sounds. Shadow pressed his nose to the glass, muscles tensed. Walter stepped outside. You lost? He called out, his voice stronger than his body should allow. The engine revved. Then the SUV peeled away into the night. He didn't chase them. He didn't have to. They had seen what they needed to see. A dog who no longer looked helpless, and an old man who didn't look alone. The next day, Meline returned with reinforcements, another deputy, a case file, and something else. We found this in the evidence locker, she said, handing it to Walter. It was Shadow's last service medal. It never got presented after the ambush. Walter knelt by Shadow and held it in front of him. Don't know if you care about medals, he said gently, but I think you earned it twice. Shadow stared at it, then slowly pressed his nose to it. The room was silent. Then Meline cleared her throat. I want to offer you something no one else has. If you're willing. Walter looked up. What is it? A full adoption. Official. Shadow becomes yours. No more questions, no more risks. Walter looked at Shadow. Shadow looked back, tail wagging once. Slow but certain. Walter smiled. We already belong to each other. Let's just make it official. And for the first time in years, Walter felt something bloom deep in his chest. Something warm. Something almost forgotten. Pride. But peace never lasts forever. That night, a message was carved into the front fence. We're coming back for what's ours. Walter stared at it in the moonlight, heart steady. They'll have to go through me first. The sun had barely touched the horizon when Walter woke up with a jolt. Shadow was already up, standing near the door, growling low, his ears pointed straight, body rigid, like a statue made for war. Outside, a faint rumble rolled through the still air. Tires on gravel, multiple engines. Walter grabbed his shotgun. He didn't hesitate. He stepped onto the porch and saw them. 3 vehicles. Tinted windows, moving slow, deliberate, like snakes circling their prey. They stopped just past the fence. The lead car's door opened. It was the same man from before, tall, cocky, too young to carry that much hate in his eyes. Behind him, 5 more stepped out, all of them armed with metal pipes, chains, and the kind of twisted smiles that made your blood run cold. Shadow growled louder. Time's up, old man, the leader shouted, walking toward the gate. You had your fun with the mutt, but he's ours. Hand him over, and no one gets hurt. Walter didn't flinch. He stepped down from the porch, shotgun resting calmly in his hands. You don't own him. You never did. The man laughed. He was ours before you ever laid eyes on him. You think giving him some scraps and a blanket makes him yours? Walter cocked the shotgun. The sound echoed like a warning through the quiet woods. I'm not the one hiding behind 5 cowards with weapons. Shadow barked once, sharp and fierce, stepping forward, placing himself at Walter's side. His tail was high, his stance solid. Whatever fear had once lived in his bones was gone. The gang moved closer, then screeching tires. Blue and red lights flashed behind the trees as Sheriff Meline's cruiser burst through the brush. Sirens off, headlights blazing. 2 more units followed. Deputies spilled out with weapons drawn. Drop your weapons and get on the ground. Meline's voice cut through the air like a blade. The gang froze. Walter didn't blink. Shadow remained steady, growling deep. One of the gang members turned to run, but was tackled before he took 2 steps. Another raised his hands, pipe falling to ground. But the leader, The one who had spoken didn't move. He looked at Walter, then at Shadow. "You think this is over?" he hissed. Walter stepped forward. "Yeah, I do." Melline approached, cuffs in hand. "You've got 3 prior charges: assault, theft, illegal possession of animals, and trespassing. And I'd say you just earned yourself a long vacation." The man spat on the ground. Shadow barked again, louder this time, eyes locked on him. "Listen to the dog," Walter said. "He's got better instincts than most men I've known." Within minutes, it was over. The gang was in custody, weapons confiscated, cars impounded. Walter watched them disappear down the road in the back of the patrol cars. The air felt different now, cleaner, lighter. Shadow sat down beside him, and Walter placed a hand on his head. "You did good, boy. Real good." Melline walked over, smiling. "You know, I've seen a lot of dogs in my day, but I've never seen one stand like that." Walter nodded. "He wasn't just protecting me. He was protecting his home." "Speaking of home," Melline said, pulling a small folder from her jacket. "It's official. The adoption papers are signed and sealed. Shadow is now yours. No strings attached." Walter took the folder, eyes stinging. "Thank you." Melline tipped her hat. "No, Walter. Thank you for not giving up on him." Walter looked down at Shadow. "He didn't give up on me either." They walked back to the house together, man and dog, survivor and protector, scarred but standing. And inside, for the first time in years, the silence didn't feel empty. It felt like peace. But even in that peace, Walter knew there was still healing to be done for both of them. It had been 2 weeks since the confrontation. 2 weeks without trucks idling outside the fence. 2 weeks without fear. Walter sat on the porch in the early morning light, his coffee steaming in his mug, the birds chirping faintly beyond the trees. For once, his cane rested beside him, and used. Shadow lay stretched out in the grass, belly up, soaking in the sun with his eyes half closed. It was the first time Walter had ever seen him truly relax. There were no chains now, no sound that made him flinch, no tension in his body, just calm peace. Walter took a slow sip and watched the dog, who he once found dying in a junkyard, now stretch his paws in the air like a puppy discovering joy again. "You keep looking at me like that," he said with a chuckle, "and I might forget you were ever a soldier." Shadow's ears twitched, but he didn't move. He just let out a soft, content sigh. Walter leaned back and closed his eyes. The pain in his knees was still there. The ache in his back hadn't disappeared. But there was something else in his chest now. Something that hadn't lived there in years. Lightness. He still talked to Jacob every night. Still kept his son's boots by the door. But now the house didn't feel like a shrine to what he lost. It felt like a home again. Later that morning, Melline stopped by with a bag of dog food and a stack of paperwork. "I figured you'd be running low by now," she said, placing the bag near the porch. "And I wanted to drop off this too." She handed him a certificate, official K-9 retirement companion bond, with both their names on it. Walter held it in his weathered hands, staring at it like it was something sacred. "Never thought I'd be bonded to anyone again," he murmured. Melline smiled. "He's earned it, and so have you." She looked down at Shadow, who trotted up and leaned into her side. "You did good, boy," she whispered, rubbing his ear. Shadow wagged his tail fully this time. Later that afternoon, Walter took Shadow for a walk through town. It wasn't something he'd done in years, not since Jacob's funeral. The sidewalks felt unfamiliar. The faces changed, but the moment people saw Shadow, they paused. Children waved. Shopkeepers stepped outside. One young man approached, eyes wide. "That's the dog from the news, right? The one who stopped that gang." Walter nodded slowly. "That's him. Can I pet him?" Shadow looked up at Walter. Walter gave a single nod. The boy reached out and gently stroked Shadow's head. The dog didn't flinch. He leaned in. "He's a hero," the boy whispered. Walter smiled faintly. "He's more than that." By the time they returned home, Walter was exhausted but happy. Shadow walked ahead now, not too far, always glancing back as if to make sure Walter was keeping up. The roles had reversed somehow. The protector and the protected, always switching, always balanced. That evening, Walter sat beside the fire again. Shadow curled at his feet, his breathing soft and rhythmic. Walter stared at the flames and let himself remember, just for a moment, the nights Jacob used to sit with him in silence, both of them sipping coffee, talking about nothing. Now, that silence was filled by something new, not a replacement, but a companion. Walter reached down and placed his hand on Shadow's back. "I think you saved me too." Shadow shifted, nudged his muzzle against Walter's foot, and let out a low, peaceful groan. For the first time since a horrible letter arrived in his mailbox 10 years ago, Walter didn't go to bed feeling empty. He looked at the old photograph of Jacob on the mantel next to the new one he had framed. Shadow lying in the sun, eyes closed, mouth open in a wide, toothy dog smile. "You would have liked him, son," Walter whispered. "He's a good one." And with that, he turned off the light. That night, no nightmares came, no noises woke them, just a quiet between heartbeats, where healing finally lives. The spring sun spilled golden over the edge of the porch as Walter stood at the mailbox, flipping through envelopes with slow, deliberate fingers. Most were bills, some were catalogs, but one caught his attention, a bold white envelope with a government seal and his name handwritten in black ink. He opened it carefully. Inside was a letter and a medal to Shadow, in honor of distinguished service and bravery in defense of civilians and law enforcement personnel. Though forgotten by some, he was never unworthy. Walter held the medal in his palm, his throat tightening. He turned back toward the house, where Shadow waited, sitting proud and alert on the porch. The dog's coat had grown back thick and shiny. His muscles had filled out again, but the biggest change was in his eyes. There was light in them now. Hope, trust, peace. Walter stepped up onto the porch and knelt beside him. "This is yours, partner," he whispered, clipping the medal gently to Shadow's collar. Shadow didn't look down at it. He looked at Walter, then licked his face once slowly and leaned in with a kind of full-bodied trust that only comes after great suffering. Walter smiled through glassy eyes. "You earned this, every piece of it." A few hours later, the front yard began to fill with people. Not strangers, neighbors, families, kids on bikes, the sheriff, even the mailman. Word had spread that today was a special day. Melline had organized it all behind the scenes, a small-town ceremony to honor Shadow's service. Nothing grand, no politicians, just the people who mattered. A wooden plaque was mounted on the old fence post that once bore a gang's threat. Now, it carried something much stronger, in honor of Shadow, K9 hero survivor and friend, rescued but never broken. Walter stood by Shadow as the sheriff gave a short speech, speaking not only of Shadow's service, but of his survival, and the man who took him in when the world looked away. "You didn't just rescue a dog," Melline said to Walter, her voice thick with emotion. "You gave this town something it hadn't seen in a while, a reason to believe again." Walter didn't speak. He only nodded gently, resting his hand on Shadow's head, as the dog stood still, regal and calm, as if he knew exactly what was happening. Afterward, the children came forward, one by one, to pet him, hug him, ask questions about his scars. Shadow didn't shy away. He stayed. He let them touch him. And with every hand that reached for him, a little more fear left his body. That evening, the house was quiet again. Not the old kind of quiet, the heavy, haunted kind. The silence was peaceful, full. Walter poured himself a cup of tea and stood by the window, watching Shadow lie on the porch, the metal on his collar glinting in the last light of day. There were no ghosts in the house now, only memories that didn't hurt to hold. Walter stepped outside and sat beside the dog. "You know," he said, looking up at the stars, "I used to think I was done, that my story had ended when Jacob left, that all I had left was waiting for time to take me." Shadow stirred, shifting closer, but then you showed up, broken, abandoned, and still fighting to live. Walter looked at him. "You gave me something to fight for, too." Shadow let out a low breath and rested his head on Walter's foot. They sat like that for a long time. Two survivors, two warriors, two souls who had known too much pain and found healing in each other. And somewhere in the middle of that silence, The stars above and the earth beneath them held one simple truth. Neither of them had been rescued. They had saved each other. If this story touched your heart, subscribe to the channel, leave a like, and share it with someone who believes in second chances. Let's keep telling stories that remind the world no one is ever too broken to be loved. Thank you for watching.